Hello and welcome to the Journal.ie office. I'm Michelle Hennessy and I'm joined today by Colman Noctor, who is a child and adolescent psychotherapist. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Michelle.
For the purpose of today, we're calling you a parenting expert. I don't know how comfortable you are with that.
That's okay.
But that's how it is anyway. We've been asking you guys for the last couple of days to send us your questions, and lots of parents have been in touch with us. If you still have a question, it's not too late to get in touch. You can tweet it at us, or you can send it to tips@thejournal.ie and we'll try and get through some of those. We're going to try and get through as many as we can because a lot of people got in touch with us. So we'll just get started.
Sure.
The first one that I want to deal with is a woman who left a comment on the article that we had up a couple of days ago, and her name is Gwen. And there was a huge response from other commenters to her, so she's the first one that I want to deal with. Her comment said, "Since I've started minding children, my little girl is very jealous and whiny and just seems sad all the time. I watch her in the schoolyard and she often is wandering around on her own, but when I ask her, is she lonely, she says no. She often says no one cares about her and no one likes her, which I know she is saying to hurt, and believe me, it breaks my heart. I love her with all my being and we need the money or I would give up minding the kids. I'm so worried about her. She's only 5 and I have depression and anxiety and I'm absolutely petrified that somehow I'm rubbing off on her even though I try 200% to be happy around her and do stuff with her. She actually keeps me alive. Please help so I don't ruin her little life and get her to a confident little girl." I mean, it sounds like a very complex issue, so what would you have to say to this woman?
You know, and the first thing for Gwen is there's two things at play here. There's her daughter's behaviour, which she's worried about, and then her own mental health issues. And she mentioned she has anxiety and depression herself, yet she tries to be 200% happy in front of her child. Her daughter is also giving two signals in saying that I'm okay on my own, yet I feel lonely. And so there's a mixed signal going from both of these people to each other. The competition with the other children that mum is minding here, I mean, there's a real life issue that we have to earn money, we have to be out and work. Of course, it would be lovely to devote all our time to our children, but that's a real life first world issues that we have to work and we have to earn money. Minding other children can be a contentious issue for other children, and children are always very competitive. So whether it's a sibling rivalry or competitive over an opposite sex parent, that we, from the start of history, there's always been a dynamic of competition. So if this little girl sees her mum delivering care to these other children, she's automatically going to feel in competition with them. Because she's 5, you can't really take the volition of what she's saying as if it has intent. She's saying you don't care about me, or people don't care about me, and that's causing her mum to, as she says, it's breaking her heart, and so she's getting a reaction from that. Children of 5 don't have a very developed conscience, so they won't know that that's a very incisive comment to make, and so they'll keep making it because it will get a reaction. What I really want to say to Gwen here, and I hope those who commented on her post would have repeated this, is that she's doing a great job. She loves her daughter, and she is clearly wants to do everything for her. The comment about she keeps her alive is a little bit concerning. I mean, our children should be really important to us, but we should have our own sense of enjoyment and fulfillment and fun outside of our children as well. That's a healthy balance. But in this situation, she loves her child desperately and she's trying everything she can, and she won't ruin her life. It's not about that. And many people who have mental health problems wonder, does that rub off on my children? And again, your issues around depression or anxiety are things you have to manage, and you have to be very careful of that. It's self-care first in that situation. So healthy mum, healthy child, healthy mum's in a good place in managing. The child's behaviour will mirror that, and that oftentimes just can't be mimicked or I suppose masqueraded as I'm fine, but I'm really tearful inside, because there's an intuitive relationship between mother and daughter where she will possibly pick up that mum is camouflaging something and will try and draw that out of her. So it's not about overburdening your child with your own woes of your life, but it is about being able to cope with failing sometimes. Parenting is simple, but it's just not easy. We love our children, we do everything we can for them, but to do that is bloody difficult sometimes, and sometimes you want to pull your hair out, and sometimes they will really hurt you, and even a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old's comment or disengaging from you can absolutely cut your heart open in some respects. But accepting that part of that failure is part of being a parent it sets an expectation that sometimes these things will happen, and you just have to manage it as best you can. But the fact that she loves her daughter so much and she will do anything for her, I think she must, maybe some special time with herself and her daughter, spending some time together outside of the other children. Again, trying to have family time and work time a little bit separate and making that look a little bit different. But for herself, Gwen, I just think she needs to get her own self-esteem in good place, her anxiety
and this
levels.
will rub off then, you think?
Absolutely, I think so. And if she's getting some help for that, maybe she needs a little bit more. But if she's not getting help, I would suggest that someone she can talk to, and someone who can support her through that, because anxiety and depression is very treatable and can improve. And having that with a 5-year-old is not easy, but it's doable. So with the right support, she should be okay.
Okay. And there are two mothers of 8-year-olds who got in touch, and I'll just read out one of them here. A commenter said, "A very bubbly, happy child who often complains of tummy ache before school. Medical conditions have been ruled out." She said it's very probably anxiety, worry over forgetting something, which is something he does a lot. Even when he remembers everything, he still worries. He's not being bullied. She said he even got out of first confession by pulling a very convincing sickie. She said he's not a bold child, but a dreamer, head in the clouds, a kind, caring child, very sensitive and empathetic. He'll cry at sad films and be upset for a while after them. And the second woman who got in touch also says her son is extremely sensitive and gets down very easily. He doesn't seem to cope well with situations inside and outside of school, and he tends to dwell on things. So actually two quite similar cases, and the same age as well. Is there something in that?
Well, the age issue is is interesting, because we'd see a lot of kind of behavioural problems in the 0 to 6s. So it kind of peaks around that time. You're also looking at kind of behavioural problems around ADHD or autistic spectrum disorders or anxiety, sleep disorders, toilet training, all of that sort of stuff. It tends to die out in or around the kind of 6 to 11, and then peaks again in adolescence. So that kind of 6 to 11 period is what we call the latency period. But oftentimes what you will see in that is anxiety, and children who are, because the social expectation from a 6-year-old to an 8-year-old to a 10-year-old, there's considerable jumps here in terms of your social prowess and your coolness and all of those sorts of things. So the first commentator there had an issue with a child who had tummy pains, and that's really common. It's a common expression of anxiety. We call it recurrent abdominal pain, and it's what's called a psychosomatic presentation. So it's psychological in origin, and a somatic kind of tummy pains, or it can oftentimes be pains in legs, back pains, headaches, those sorts of hard to detect issues. Once you've medically investigated them, there doesn't seem to be a medical reason for it. There's a good chance it is anxiety, and given the context of this little boy who's very sensitive, he's a worrier, he gets upset about things, he will cry at movies and watching cartoons, that their skills and kind of a curse in some respects. To be sensitive is wonderful. It makes you a ferocious friend. It makes you someone who can tune into some other people, and kind of makes you emotionally intelligent. But when you're 8, if you're absorbing all that emotion, you don't have the capacity to manage it. So, if you're soaking up how mum is doing, how dad's doing, what everyone in the schoolyard is feeling, you have these antennae that are open to all of these signals, yet you don't have the internal coping strategies to manage it. So in many cases, and this is not uncommon, and not surprising to the same kind of presentations, children get overwhelmed, and so they can't manage the hustle and bustle of school and expectation, and it's almost an anticipation that going to school is going to be really difficult. The tummy pain is not necessarily only a manipulative effort to get out of things. It may well be actual, because if you've an important interview coming up, or a job or something, you can feel nauseous, you can go off your food, you can actually have crampy tummy pains, and the anxiety in the child manifests in the same way. Children don't have a language for this emotionality, so they can't articulate it. So it's often articulated in a sleep problem, a tummy pain, a backache, or irritable, irrational behaviours. And oftentimes they can signpost to us that there's something else going on. In the little boy who's extra sensitive, we don't parent all our children the same. A child who's much more robust and able can take a kind of a firmer approach in parenting. A child like this is not going to respond well to, you have to go to school, and kind of a heavy-handed parenting.
That'll make things worse.
It will make them worse because the
Yeah.
anxiety is not being listened to, it's not being validated. But you can't become consumed by the anxiety either. And you can't say, yes, school is awful, it's terrible, stay at home.
Yeah.
So it's about trying to put as many supports in place to make that possible for him, to make school possible, and liaise with the school, mention to the teachers if they can do anything on their side. So it's a dual, you're trying to get him out of bed and into that school, but also trying to entice him into the school environment.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is, in this situation, he's 8, so he still needs to be coached around life, that bad things happen and you survive it and you manage it. And I oftentimes say to parents, it's not about having the answers. With an anxious child, it's like sitting on a roller coaster, right? If you're sitting on a roller coaster with a child, you're nervous and they're nervous. The best approach is just to say, look, I don't know what's up here. I don't know what's ahead of us. But we've got each other. We're here. We'll hold on to each other and we'll get through it.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of a philosophy. We'll work with the child's anxiety without imploding to it and without forcing them to manage it.
Yeah.
And it's just a useful kind of metaphor to have in your head about how you'd feel better about something that's you don't know what's coming around the corner.
Yeah. There's one that we got which is very specific, but it might be something that a lot of parents of deaf children can relate to. A woman called Elaine in one of the comments said, what do you do when your child is partially deaf and wears hearing aids? None of the usual techniques and tips work, and there's no support for general day-to-day parenting like sleep time, meal time, treats and tech time. She says sleep time is the worst as he will have the hearing aid off. And she said, I can't just give single sentence instructions or lull him quietly to sleep. Do you have any tips for her?
First of all, the resources for deaf children are not what they should be, I think. And in terms, it's not something I would have a great expertise in. I'd say that from the start. What I do know is that children who have hearing problems or deaf, when they close their eyes, you rely more on your hearing. So when you're sleeping, the child is now feeling absolutely vulnerable that both of their senses are being kind of taken from them. So at sleep time, oftentimes a dark room can be, if you can't hear, if you can imagine yourself, if you were lying in a space where you couldn't hear and it was pitch black, it'd be very terrifying.
Yeah.
So the idea behind what they would say is kind of night lights, there's kind of glow in the dark stickers, something to ground themselves in where they're at is helpful. The temptation is to lie with the child, but then you can get into accidental habit making in some respects. But your presence is really important. Another thing that I've heard that works is kind of picture boards. So you have pictures that you get, brush your teeth, wash your face, story time, kiss, and bedtime, and take the pictures down off the wall as you do one to the next. So the child knows what's coming next. You know what I mean? In terms of there's a kind of a storyline to what happens.
You often hear that for general bedtime, putting a structure in place is very good for children.
Routine. It's the only way. Children are behavioural, so they learn through behavioural programming, and that's why things like star charts and things work. It's not about, you can't negotiate with a toddler. You have to kind of condition them around how to respond. So a predictable routine is really helpful. But for a deaf child, just those kind of stimulus, not overly stimulating things, and even those kind of, I think you can get these kind of grow clocks which have nighttime and daytime. They have a little kind of a reflected, projected image onto the wall. But just something in the room that grounds him will just lessen that sense of feeling vulnerable when he can't hear and his eyes are closed and he can't see.
That's great. There's one here that probably a lot of parents of toddlers can relate to, and it's to do with children and television. This woman says that my 3-year-old has started to get obsessive about TV in one particular program he watches. It's got to the stage, it's the first thing he asks for in the morning. He has a meltdown if he can't watch it. He doesn't understand if it's not on. It's so bad, I always give in, and I've started to use it as my bargaining tool. So if you eat your dinner, you can watch. If you get dressed, you can watch. I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I'm finding it hard to refuse point blank, and he knows he's got me. She said she's trying new activities like arts and crafts, getting outside, but she said eventually he'll ask for his program again. I'm slowly going insane, she says. Have you any advice?
Okay, well, first of all, he's 3. So 3-year-olds have obsessional interests. That's what they do. And they'll move from one to the other, usually with some degree of regularity. And it could be Spider-Man is everything, and everything is Spider-Man pajamas, cups, beakers, everything else. And then all of a sudden, Spider-Man's gone and is replaced by something else. So they're kind of, it's a fickle obsession in some respects. However, obsessional behaviours in children work very, if there's an intense orderliness and colour-codedness, can be indicative of something more sinister, but more serious, I suppose, in terms of something like an autistic spectrum type presentation. But if the context is just around this show, I would imagine maybe it's something that's quite developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
she's giving herself a hard time for using it as a bargaining tool. As a parent of a 3-year-old, the reality is you will use leverage. You will use anything that has that currency that will get the child on board. So to use it as an enticement to eat dinner and things like that, yes, maybe not sending the right signal, because the 3-year-old believes this show is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
By you using it in response to getting them to do things, is it encouraging its value?
Right.
So it's not about that. It's not about diluting that you can't live without it and it's the most important thing and you should strive for it. But she's doing the right things, including other interests, trying to dilute the intensity of the relationship between the show and the child. Again, if it's an age-appropriate show, there may be something that he'll just grow out of it.
Yeah.
But if it's in the context of other maybe sensory issues, rigidity, maybe speech and language problems, and the obsessional interest in the context of that, then it's mildly more concerning. And you should be concerned without being alarmed. Children of small ages have kind of oddities in their behaviours that could be assigned to something quite serious. It could be something absolutely appropriate that will just pass.
Right. One on eating food, and I know that a lot of parents, I think, struggle with this as well. A guy who says, I have a lad who'll be 5 in August, loves treats, who doesn't, but I cut them out when he won't eat his dinner. He said the problem is dinner. I can't get him to eat his veg, and he pussyfoots around his meat now as well. He's not spoiled with treats. It's the main meals that are the problem. He said that we have a 2-year-old who would eat you if you stood still long enough. Why won't the 5-year-old eat his proper meals?
This is very common. Again, it's a developmental piece, and lots of children will struggle with this. The idea behind, I oftentimes think parents become obsessed with eating rather than the child, and it creates there's a real emphasis on you having to try everything and having to taste everything and having to finish everything. That anxiety or that kind of obsession in some respects, a child will see that as something they can manipulate because it's something that's really important to you. And there's a kind of a sense, and one of the earlier commenters said, he has me. And in terms of the meal eating issue, there is that sense of having you. The snacks thing, we know that sugary foods in whatever regularity they stall your hunger. So if you eat lots of snacky food during the day, you'll sit down to a dinner, you'll not really feel like it. So that kind of grazing on snacks is unhelpful. So I would cut out the snacks. And in terms of trying to re-establish a routine around eating meals, losing the snacks for a week or two out of the house might not be a bad idea, just to reintroduce that. My mum used to always say hunger is a great sauce, and so the child needs to be hungry. But allow a child to be a bit of a fussy eater. We all don't like everything, so there might be things, and there's people, adults my age, who have Brussels sprout trauma, because they were made eat this thing, and it became really important. And we know that, through even neurological studies, that being forced to eat something can have an association right through your life from childhood all the way up, and we associate feelings with certain things. I would back off on the major issue of this being so important, and actual fact I would allow him to eat what he can. Yes, you can try and make things, I'm guessing he's tried maybe making mealtimes more playful. If you want to get vegetables and things into your child, lumping them beside meat is not very appealing. Getting it involved in a stir fry or something, I'm no culinary expert, but I think if you camouflage the good foods inside something like a stir fry or something, noodles or pasta or something like that, don't cook different meals for different children in terms of, I have to make this pot of stuff for your sister, this for you, and this for you. That doesn't encourage a child to be able to manage a variety within their diet.
Does it help to have the whole family eating the same thing if you can?
It's more helpful to eat together. That's the most important thing. And family meal times, if they take a long time, a child of what age is that child's 5, 15 or 20 minutes is a huge long space of time for them to spend sitting. So if you're trying to do that and your mealtime lasts 45 minutes, the child is going to get agitated and bored. And once they pass that threshold of being engaged, you're actually fighting a losing battle to keep them there, because it becomes a power of wills or locking horns. What I would say is, if the child is able to, what I wouldn't allow them to do is play around the area of the dinner table. So they don't want to eat anymore, they leave the table and go into another room. What you'll find is they'll gravitate back because they want to be around you. It's not, and the food is that thing or that communication that allows them that engagement. And oftentimes they'll say, I'll eat it if you feed it to me, and all of these kind of mind games, which are incredibly
great, aren't they?
but they're wonderful. Toddlers and small children are they are tuned so well and they're brilliant at it. But as parents, we can be outsmarted sometimes. And it's not about getting an us and them dynamic going, but I would cut out the snacks, dilute the intensity of meal times, and try and just encourage them to eat it as they can, and try and camouflage the good stuff in with the other stuff, but definitely cut out the snacks.
That's great. One woman says, my 3-year-old son has a receptive speech disorder and some autistic habits. These are very mild and his behaviour is very good. He's fully toilet trained. He just can't speak much and rarely understands what you say. Have you come across this disorder, and will he speak and ever be able to understand us?
Yeah, I mean, there's two types. I'm not a speech and language therapist, so I wouldn't give an in-depth response to this, but there's things called receptive language disorders, which is a difficulty understanding, and then expressive language disorders is difficulty expressing how you feel. So if he's not speaking, it may not just be a receptive issue, there may be an expressive issue as well. It sounds like this lady's had this child assessed, and so she may know where he's at with that. I would rely heavily on the assessment reports in terms of prognosis, whether the child's going to speak at all. But lots of children in my work, and I would give her some hope in this regard, wouldn't have spoken till they're 5 and 6 years of age because of these conditions, and then can become quite articulate and able to speak their mind and things like that. Those difficulties will play a role in his schooling in terms of how he takes down things on the board and listening to teachers giving instructions, and he may have specific learning skills around certain areas and may need some learning support around that. But he's still very young, but I would rely on your speech and language therapist to guide you through that. They're wonderful people who do really wonderful work.
There's a question that we've had in just while we've been live, which is kind of interesting. It says, our 14-year-old boy doesn't talk to us anymore. It's like pulling teeth. He says he's happy, he plays sports and has friends, but he doesn't bring them to the house at all. Not losing sleep at the moment, but looking for tips.
Yeah, I mean, it's irritability and kind of disengagement of an early teen is fairly typical. I mean, not speaking at all would be marginally worrying, I would think. Now, whether that's a figure of speech, but it's not unusual for a teenager to communicate in grunts. But their life outside and their sports and their friends and things are all going well. It may not be indicative of any sort of mood disorder or anything like that. What we tend to do is, if we feel a teenager is quiet, we try to press them more. What's wrong and how are you doing, and follow them up and knock on the door more times when it's closed than it's open. And in actual fact, that can be perceived as nagging, and can be perceived as hassle. What I'd say to them is, we love you and we're here for you, and anything you want, leave the door open on your side. And say, I will check in on you because you're my son and I love you and I'm worried about you. But I think that openness of communication, if there is something in his life that's troubling him, that will allow him to speak to the parents about it. But oftentimes pursuing someone for information as to what's going on in their life only serves the purpose of closing them up more. But definitely leaving that open, approachable bit. Some of the grumpy, irritable is part of the disorder of adolescence, and I think that's very understandable and normal, and it's a developmental step that they're stepping away from their parents. And adolescents typically get that wrong. They step away too far, so I don't need you at all in my life until my trainers get old and I need new ones or something. So there's always a return in that if there's nothing significantly wrong in the relationship, and it doesn't sound like there is anything significantly wrong in that relationship. He's maybe just experimenting with a bit of independence. Allow him that within safe limits, but keep the door open and absolutely be approachable to him if there is anything that he's worried about in his own life. That's the most important thing. And
I mean, if there are parents watching who have teenagers who they think are troubled or are going through something, or I think a lot of parents are worried about internet activity and things like that. How can they approach it, and how do you think that they can get their teenagers to open up to them about things that are going on in their lives? Well,
technology has changed. The landscape of family life in Ireland has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. It's much more difficult to get teenagers to a dinner table, to have family time, to protect that. And even we were talking earlier on about the children who are competing with other siblings for attention, competing with the mobile device is now the new one. And our iPhone babies are not even 6 yet, so we don't know the impact of that. So where it was me fighting my sister for my mum's attention, now I have to fight this glossy device that makes her happy that she won't leave the room without, which I'm fascinated by how that's going to play out. But getting back to the point, the technology issue, our physical worlds have never been smaller. but our global and virtual worlds have never been bigger. So children have less of a time where they hang out, so they hang out in bedrooms more. And we have a notion that just because they're up there, that they're safe, but we can't be knowledgeable of that if they have a portal into the whole world in their hands or in their laptops. So what you need to do as a parent is compete with technology. You have to compete on the level of enticing them into a relationship with you. I would say, if I had one rule for parents, I would say go to your teenager and say to them, if anything happens online that you're worried about, tell me about it, no matter what it is, whether it's something to do with friendships, cyberbullying, pornography, anything you
won't be in trouble.
I will not plug it out.
Yeah.
The one reason that teenagers don't report any online difficulty is they say, if I say this, my mom's going to take away my Facebook. And it is the first thing the parents do. So the first thing you say is, you can work it out. I will not, it won't mean prohibition, because it is one of the most, I suppose, silencers of children who, and oftentimes children will speak to me in therapy that they've had something for a long time, that there's something troubling them online, but the reason they wouldn't have told us is that the Wi-Fi lead would have been pulled out at home.
Yeah.
You know, so just reassure them that that wouldn't be the case. But your relationship with your children and teenagers have never been more important than it is now, because now we have something else to compete with, and it's 24/7. It's always on. You know, when I was growing up, my sisters would want to speak to their friends, but they might have only got 20 minutes on the house phone in the evening time. Now the children are Snapchatting, Facebooking for 7 and 8 hours. So it's much more difficult to access them. But have sacred spaces at home where no technology exists, and moderate technology like fast food. It's about snacking, you know. So you moderate junk food, moderate that, and start early if you can.
Great, interesting. We have time for one more question now. We'll get to this one because it's quite interesting. A worried dad got in touch with us. He doesn't want his name to be used. He said he has twin girls who will be 10 at the end of the month. We noticed something strange about one of the kids' faces, but it took us a few days to figure out what was up. She plucked all her eyelashes out. He says, I don't mean eyebrows, her actual eyelashes. We warned her to stop and she did, but we've noticed lately that she started again. I'd be interested in getting an opinion of an expert.
Yeah, it's not common, but it's not unusual. The clinical name for this is a thing called trichotillomania, which sounds odd and funny, but it's not. It's a soothing activity that children do, and oftentimes in adolescence, where they will pull out hair as a kind of almost an anxiety or soothing thing. You can oftentimes see a child who play with their hair, and sometimes split ends, and someone who's nervous might play with their hair, eat their hair. This is a situation where children can pull out significant chunks of hair, eyelashes, eyebrows, things like that. It sounds unfathomable to someone who doesn't do it. It oftentimes is in the context of a kind of obsessional compulsive condition. It can sometimes, but it's more than likely to be an attempt at managing anxiety. It can sometimes happen in isolation, but my own personal belief is that there would be an anxiety there in the first place. It's very treatable. It's something that can do very well. Once the anxiety is managed, then the trichotillomania or the hair pulling can certainly improve. But it's something that, if you're noticing is becoming more of a pattern, if you've suggested to your daughter that she stop and she's finding it difficult to stop doing it, then some professional help may well be warranted, and usually a CAMS or a local child and adolescent mental health service would be familiar with this, and they should be able to manage it and help you with it.
This isn't the sort of thing that's a self-harm issue? No,
it's not. They suffer is described as quite soothing to kind of do that, and it can be worrying because it's so unusual and it seems quite odd. In my experience, mostly it's not with that intent in mind. It's not about a self-harm issue, but an anxiety that seems to be almost pacified by this activity. But it certainly would be linked to anxiety, and that's the issue that I think would need to be pursued with this child, is what's causing this anxiety and how can she be helped to manage it in a different way.
Okay. That's all that we're going to have time for. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and also to everybody who sent their questions. We got some really interesting responses from people in the comments and by email and over Twitter and everything. There was a really good response. And thanks a lot to Colman for joining us. Thank you. Bye.